Elizabeth Short, better known as the Black Dahlia. Her case may be the most brutal unsolved murder in history. And there are many theories about the nickname Black Dahlia, including how she adorned her black hair, her dark hair, with dahlia flowers. Now, as a surgeon, I was completely shocked by what was done to her body, and you will be too. What really happened to this 22-year-old aspiring actress? She was in Hollywood. Could a doctor have been responsible for her death? Today, you're going to hear from the family, who say they know who killed the Black Dahlia because they believe the killer is one of their own. Crime correspondent Melissa Moore is here with the true story between this Hollywood murder mystery. Listen, guys, there have been books, there have been movies, there's been a TV show based on the Black Dahlia. And after all these years, why are so many people still fascinated by this murder?
Well, the way her body was mutilated, how it was found, it was posed in a specific way. I think in all of the investigations I've done with murders, this is the most brutal and the most gruesome crime scene I've ever seen.
So in the reading that I've been doing, it seems through since the murder actually happened, there's been one name that kept coming up, Dr. George Hodel.
Right.
Well, who is he? What was he about?
Well, he was a prominent doctor and surgeon in LA. He was known for his IQ. He had an IQ of 186. He graduated high school at age 15, so he's very intelligent. But as a doctor, he was suspected of fraud, that he was billing patients for tests that they didn't have and also performing illegal abortions.
Illegal abortions?
Correct.
So Dr. George Hodel's son, Steve, is here today, and he believes his father is the one who killed the Black Dahlia. And what you're about to hear is Steve describing how police found her body. It is graphic, so discretion is advised.
The fact that this incredible story is real, it's historical, they couldn't make the story up. A fair amount of people are familiar with the crime name itself, Black Dahlia. But if you ask somebody, are you familiar with the Elizabeth Short murder? They're going to say, no, never heard of it. When the officers respond to the crime scene, they have a nude body. She's a Jane Doe. Jane Doe number 1. No ID, no purse, nothing. The detectives note that the body has been drained of blood, sanguinated. There's no blood at all at the crime scene, so they know immediately that it occurred elsewhere. And they discover that the body has been washed clean. The right breast is completely excised, removed. They look at the left thigh and they see a large chunk of flesh has been removed. There's a 4 to 5 inch incision right above the pubic area, which was totally consistent with a hysterectomy. There was blunt force trauma to the head. The other horror that the detectives discovered at the crime scene was that her mouth had been cut almost ear to ear. Also, clearly observable was that the body had not just been thrown out of a car and just dumped there. It was carefully posed just off of the sidewalk. The upper torso, the hands were over the head as if you were surrendering or giving up, and then carefully juxtaposed maybe 6 inches to the west of the upper torso was the lower half. The legs were spread wide open. So it was clearly that somebody was trying to make some kind of a statement here and had carefully posed the body.
It's pretty gruesome. Steve joins me now. He's featured in a new podcast, The Root of Evil. What was it like growing up with your father, Dr. George Hodel?
You know, it was really very fairyland. I mean, it was wonderful. You know, we lived in this amazing mansion in this, you know, it was like a Hollywood set, a Mayan temple right in the center of Hollywood. He was a prominent physician. He doctored to the rich and famous. My mom was this beautiful, you know, screenwriter, had been married to John Huston, the famous film director.
Yeah.
And they were the king and queen, and we were living in this mansion, and we were the 3 little princes, my brothers and I, running around. It was great.
So what kind of a man was your father? Even if it was a bucolic, was he sentimental, loving, tough?
No, he was not your warm, fuzzy dad. I mean, he was cold, cool, reserved, kind of old school, disciplinarian. You know, if we did something wrong, it was to the basement with a leather strap and spankings and stuff. I mean, but that's kind of, we never looked at that as abuse back then. It was like, we're talking about mid-40s. Yeah. And it was kind of like the way things were done.
Discipline.
Yeah, he believed in discipline.
So when did you first hear that your father was a suspect in the slaying of the Black Dahlia? May have done all this mutilation?
Yeah. Well, I had served a full career with LAPD as a homicide detective, retired 13 years, and basically my father dies in San Francisco. I go down to do the things you have to do, and I get on the phone with my half-sister Tamar, who's living in Hawaii, and we're talking about the great man and how much we're going to miss him. And she says, well, he was a suspect in the Black Dahlia murder. And I said, there's no way. I knew Dad was eccentric in many ways, but I said, murder, no way.
So Steve set out to prove his father did not commit this murder, but from the very start, he found evidence that called that assumption into question. So let's talk about some of the evidence that you discovered. Come on up. The first bit of evidence was how the body was found. Now, I made a little diagram here so everyone can understand this. So let's discover together some of this evidence. First, I remember how the body was found. It was cut in half with surgical precision. And the interesting thing about it is that it was cut in half without going through a bone, right? If you cut through someone's legs, you cut the bones. Where do you cut the body in half and not cut a bone? Well, today the procedure is called a hemicorpectomy. It's done as a last resort for a small number of devastating conditions. So how do you actually do it? How would you cut a body in half? Well, only a surgeon would really know how to do this. First, get rid of all the skin, get rid of the muscles, right? Go down deep, and you'll notice, without the ligaments and the blood vessels, that if you look in the spine, and this is the lumbar spine, and you go the fifth lumbar, remove the fascia here too, the fifth vertebrae, the fourth vertebrae, and the third vertebrae. And right between the second and the third, right there, notice there's nothing in the way. You could actually cut right through there if you get rid of these ligaments. And if you spin this around, you'll notice that there's a little room there. There's enough room that you can get a knife in there if you're a murderer or trying to do something more helpful and actually divide the body in half. You can actually pull these apart in the back. You can feel where the spinal processes are. Now, once you've done that, you're left with two halves, right? There's the top half that would have the organs. If you're trying to help somebody, you could do this operation. And there's the bottom half where there's no organs. So you can see why it would be taught. But what's the significance between this hemicorpectomy and your father?
Well, Dad went through medical school in the 1930s, mid-30s, at UCSF San Francisco. And they actually taught this procedure. And there was no question by the original investigators that it was had to have been a surgeon.
So this was just the beginning. This is the bit of evidence that really got me, because people could have learned that. This is handwriting that you say is from your father.
Yes.
This is the only handwritten note to the police. If you don't mind, here it is, turning in Wednesday. So he's turning himself in. He's saying,
right.
Had my fun with police, Black Dahlia Avenger.
Right. Your parents' handwriting, I know mine.
Yeah, this put your father's handwriting. This we know is a letter from your dad, a note from your dad. You actually had professionals look at this, handwriting experts.
I did. Question document, court-certified question document expert, and I gave her no details. It was a blind comparison. But there were 25 different question documents of my father that she examined. And said absolutely he was the author of at least 4 of the Black Dahlia notes.
Well, then, how did he even do this? The crime scene had no blood, as we just heard, none.
Right.
So where did the murder actually take place? Where do you think your father killed Elizabeth Short?
So actually the murder took place at our residence, this Mayan temple that I described. The indications are that she was probably drugged. That was part of his MO on other crimes. And taken to the bathtub, surgically bisected. Surgeons have said it probably took 3 hours maybe to do this actual bisection. And I'm actually able to link the crime scene to the house by the fact that he used cement sacks to transport the body. So, basically I was actually able to locate in the UCLA files some original receipts from Frank Lloyd Wright Jr., who built our home. And these were dated within 3 days of the actual finding of the body. So we've got the original receipts for these 50-pound sacks of cement and also fertilizer, banditti, at the house 3 days before they find the body at the crime scene, and then they're at the body.
So it definitely ties him. At least appliances in the house.
Yeah.
Up next, why Dr. Hodel was investigated but never charged with the Black Dahlia's murder.
She was cut completely in two, with each half of her body posed for the most shocking effect. The upper half, with her arms raised, was moved far enough away from her lower half, with its legs spread, that the person who first discovered her thought it was 2 pieces of a mannequin.
We're back with one of the most famous unsolved murders in American history, the Black Dahlia. Who brutally killed this 22-year-old aspiring actress? Was it a prominent surgeon named Dr. George Hodel? Yvette Gentile and Rasha Pecoraro
Yeah.
are the hosts of the podcast Root of Evil, the true story of the Hodel family and the Black Dahlia. They're also sisters, and they're the great-granddaughters of Dr. George Hodel. Now, this is a complex story, so I'm going to give you all a little bit of the family tree here. Fauna Hodel is Yvette and Rasha's mother that you spoke about. Tamar, Fauna's birth mother, placed Fauna up for adoption as a child. You see it there on the left part of your screen. Years later, Dr. George Hodel would help reunite mother and daughter. You see Steve, as we just talked to earlier, is the brother of Tamar. So, Rasha, what have you learned about your grandmother's relationship with her dad, Dr. George Hodel?
The sad part that we learned was Tamar had an intimate relationship with her father, George Hodel. They started having intercourse when Tamar was 14. And this was an open family secret. Tamar was the only grandmother I ever knew growing up in Hawaii, since I'm 11 years younger, and she openly talked about it. And it was more of she talked about it like it was a love affair, not that it was what it was, which was incest and rape.
It was rape. It was 100% rape. And she was a victim.
Of course. But although she may not have spoken about it badly, it was a criminal offense. He was put on trial for this.
He was.
He was, and he was acquitted.
In 1949. And there were 3 witnesses.
But how was he acquitted if he raped his daughter and they're witnesses?
From everything we've been told, he was untouchable. He
had everybody in his pocket. I mean, he was a very prominent doctor there. He was the head of the VD clinic. He was the VD czar.
Of all of LA. And he had dirt on a lot of people.
So how prevalent was incest, Rasha, in the Hodel family, specifically by Dr. George?
Honestly, doing this podcast, we learned so much more. It repeated. The cycle repeated. George did it to Tamar. Tamar repeated it to other children, and George also, we found out, did it to our mother's sister as well.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the Black Dahlia case. Obviously, George Hodel had several things that were wrong. Growing up in this case, did you ever talk about it at home? Did it come up? Did anyone suspect that he may have been responsible?
Absolutely. I mean, probably since the time I was 16 years old, Tamar would tell these stories about George Hodel, her father, about, him having sexual relationships with her, and also that he was the killer of the Black Dahlia.
How did she live with herself with that? How could she reconcile that with her dad?
That's a good question.
She was a very complex woman. She died almost 2 years prior to our mom dying. But I think she compartmentalized a lot.
Well, I think it's like I think about it like this. George Hodel was truly the root of evil. And Tamar, his daughter, she was a victim.
Do you believe that your great-grandfather was the murderer of the Black Dahlia?
Absolutely.
Without a doubt.
100%.
100%.
Yes.
Yes.
So Dr. George Hodel was suspect. He was ultimately never charged. How is that possible? I mean, I can imagine him having influence. If you're running the VD clinic, he's got dirt. But you get away with murder if you have that kind of clout?
Well, he fled the country as well.
Yeah.
He went to the Philippines, so he was out of
And
the
then he was in
away.
the Philippines for 30 years, 40 years.
Yeah, until he returned.
Yeah.
This is a tough family. There's incest, there's murder, alleged murder anyway. How does it affect both of you knowing you're part of this clan?
We're Fauna Hodel's daughters. It will never affect who we are.
And it will never defy who we are, because our mother was rooted in love, and that's what she instilled in us.
Mom was pure aloha, pure love.
So here's the big question. Is the Black Dahlia the only murder Dr. George Hodel is suspected of, or were there others? Stay with us. We're back with a cold case murder that could finally be solved. Elizabeth Short, known as the Black Dahlia, was brutally murdered and her body meticulously cut in half. Dr. George Hodel was a suspect but never charged. Dr. George Hodel's son, Steve, is back, along with great-granddaughters Yvette and Rasha. Thank you all for being here. I know this is sensitive material, but let me start with you, Steve. You've alluded that there may have been other victims. I've just heard that a little bit here and there. Sure. Do you believe your father was a serial murderer, that he killed more than one woman?
There's no question about it. I mean, once I got into the weeds of the investigation, and I'm thinking I'm going to clear him, and I actually get beyond that to where it's actually pointing towards him, I discovered that LAPD back then was actually actively investigating at least 5 separate murders that they had linked together. Now, they didn't have the term serial killer back then. Mm-hmm. They called them chain murders.
Think of how many serial murderers have existed in our recent history and how many probably are still out there we don't know about. This is the part that we always celebrate the ones we catch, but there are lots of folks who get away with it. On that note, his handwritten note that he sent to the police, taunting them, it said, Black Dahlia Avenger. What was he avenging?
Well, he was avenging Elizabeth Short because she was going to report him and turn him in. He's in China. He gets the word. He comes back immediately, quits his job there, comes back. She starts running, and within 8 weeks, she's dead. So, and then he writes this Avenger. She was going to clearly, go to the police and report this.
How as his son do you reconcile yourself? I mean, this man, I gather, showed some love to you, even though he was fairly cold.
Well, in the last decade of his life, he came back to the United States, relocated in San Francisco. We became very close. I'd come down and see him. He'd come up and see me. And we had he was never warm fuzzy, but he was, it was a lot better than the estranged, acquaintance we had before. So, I've been through every possible emotion you can think of, I see him now as a Jekyll and Hyde. I never quite believed. I thought it was a nice fiction story, but now I have to admit that, there's this good Dr. Jekyll in him that could have cured cancer. 186 IQ, Caltech at 14, he could have done anything for good. And then this Hyde, the monster inside, took him in the other, went to the dark side.
Yvette, what compelled you to want to tell your family story? This is painful stuff. Incest is always devastating.
Well, I think my mother, she always wanted to do a documentary about the family story, and when we started working on this podcast, we all have family baggage, all of us, but this story is you just keep going, what? And it's just about all of us, persevering and not letting that evil define who we are.
Steve, what are your hopes for this case? You believe there'll ever be justice for the Black Dahlia, that poor woman who was murdered?
Exactly. I mean, you're as a homicide detective, you're literally standing in the shoes of the victim. So, to me, you'll hear some detectives and people say there's no such thing as closure, that's BS. It's not. I mean, yeah, he's dead, there's nothing we can do about that. But you can, just the family members and the distant relatives knowing who did it, there's some degree of closure in that. I'm hoping that we can get DNA. I'm absolutely confident that in many of these cases, if they would test and get the DNA, I have my father's full DNA. It's going to be a slam dunk.
Godspeed. Steve,
thank you.
Yvette, Rasha, I appreciate you both being here.
Thank you, Dr.
Be sure to check out Cadence 13's Root of Evil, the true story of the Hodel family and the Black Dahlia. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on new videos to live the good life.